Solving quadratic equations by completing the square. This method for solving quadratic equations works for all quadratic equations but is easiest if a is equal to 1 and b is an even number. First, you must understand what it means to complete the square. Completing the square means finding the constant that will change a quadratic binomial into a perfect square trinomial. To do this, you must arrange the terms in standard form and find the square of half of the linear term. Let's look at some examples. In this example, we are looking for the constant c that will make this phrase into a perfect square trinomial. First, we find half of -14, which is -7. Square that, and we get 49. C equals 49. 49 will make this expression into a perfect square trinomial. What I mean by that is if we factor this expression, we get two factors that are exactly the same. X minus 7 times x minus 7 equals x squared minus 14x plus 49. Thus, x squared minus 14x plus 49 is a perfect square trinomial, and we have completed the square. Now pause the video and try this one yourself. Now that you have tried it, check your work. First, find half of 10. Half of 10 is 5. 5 squared is 25. Thus the answer is 25. 25 completes the square. To solve quadratic equations by completing the square, we need to follow these steps. First, move the constant to the right. Second, divide everything by the coefficient of x squared if necessary. Third, complete the square by adding the correct constant to both sides of the equation. Finally, solve the resulting equation by taking the square root of both sides. In the first example, start by subtracting 19 from both sides. Leave a space on the left for completing the square. Now complete the square. Half of -16 is -8. -8 squared is positive 64. Add 64 to both sides of the equation. Now factor the left side. The -8 you used to complete the square reappears in the factor. 64 minus 19 is 45. Now take the square root of both sides. Remember to include a plus or minus on the right side. The square root of x minus 8 squared is x minus 8. The square root of 45 can be simplified by factoring out 9. So the simplified form is plus or minus 3 square root of 5. We're not finished until x is isolated. Add 8 to both sides of the equation. X equals 8 plus or minus 3 square root of 5. The final answer then is 8 plus 3 square root of 5 and 8 minus 3 square root of 5. In example 2, start by subtracting 1 from both sides. We now have 3x squared plus 6x equals 3. We cannot complete the square when x squared has a coefficient. Divide both sides by 3. We now have x squared plus 2x equals 1. We can now complete the square. Half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. Add 1 to both sides of the equation. Now factor the left side, for x plus 1 squared equals 2. Take the square root of both sides. We now have x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. Subtract 1 from both sides to get your final answer, -1 plus or minus the square root of 2. Final answer is -1 plus the square root of 2 and -1 minus the square root of 2. In example 3, start by subtracting 31 from both sides of the equation. Leave space on the left side to complete the square. To complete the square, find half of 12, which is 6. 6 squared is 36. Add 36 to both sides of the equation. Factor the left side for x plus 6 squared equals 9. Now take the square root of both sides. The square root of x plus 6 squared equals plus or minus the square root of 9. Thus, x plus 6 equals plus or minus 3. Subtract 6 from both sides. The two solutions then are -6 plus 3 and -6 minus 3. -6 plus 3 is -3. -6 minus 3 is -9. So the final answers are -3 and -9. Now pause the video and try the next example yourself. Now that you have tried it, check your work. Add 27 to both sides. Now complete the square. Half of -10 is -5. -5 squared is positive 25. Add 25 to both sides of the equation. Factor the left side of the equation for x minus 5 squared equals 72. Take the square root of both sides. Simplify the square root of 72 by taking out a perfect square, thus getting 6 times the square root of 2. Now add 5 to both sides. X equals 5 plus or minus 6 times the square root of 2. The final answers are 5 plus 6 times the square root of 2 and 5 minus 6 times the square root of 2. In example 5, start by adding 24x to both sides of the equation. Leave -78 on the right and leave space for completing the square. Notice there's a coefficient, so divide everything by -3. X squared minus 8x equals 26. Now complete the square. Half of -8 is -4. -4 squared is positive 16. Add 16 to both sides of the equation. Factor the left side for x minus 4 squared. Take the square root of both sides. For x minus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 42, which cannot be simplified. Add 4 to both sides. X equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 42. Final answer, 4 plus the square root of 42 and 4 minus the square root of 42. Now pause the video and try the next one yourself. Now that you have tried it, check your work. Add 68 to both sides of the equation. Since x squared has a coefficient, divide both sides by 2, leaving x squared minus 8x equals 34. Complete the square. Half of -8 is -4. -4 squared is 16. Add 16 to both sides of the equation. Factor the left side. Take the square root of both sides. Plus or minus the square root of 50 can be simplified by factoring out a perfect square. It simplifies to plus or minus 5 square root of 2. For x minus 4 equals plus or minus 5 square root of 2. Add 4 to both sides. X equals 4 plus or minus 5 square root of 2. The final answer is 4 plus 5 square root of 2 and 4 minus 5 square root of 2. Please continue to use these notes as you complete your homework. Thank you.